It all started with a smile that hit a storm to the outside world. Sarah and I looked like the picture-perfect couple. We had the polished smiles, the warm holiday photos, the dinners with friends where everyone said you two are perfect together. But behind closed doors, something darker was brewing. What looked like love was slowly turning into war. I never thought the woman I once trusted more than life itself would one day try to destroy me. You see, betrayal doesn't happen in a flash, it creeps in. Slowly, quietly, until one day you wake up and realize the ground beneath you has collapsed. And her betrayal was sharper than any knife. It wasn't just reckless, it was calculated, merciless. She didn't just want to leave me. No, she wanted to erase me. She wanted to dismantle my life, piece by piece, until nothing remained. My name, my reputation, my future all on her chopping block. And here's the chilling part. She almost succeeded. For a while, she had me cornered. Every move I made, she was 2 steps ahead. Every secret, every weakness I had ever shared in trust, she used as a weapon. But here's the thing about betrayal. It awakened something in you. Something primal. And in me, it awakened a fire I never knew existed. Because if she thought I would roll over and let her win, she didn't know me at all. This isn't just a story of a marriage gone wrong. This is a war. A war where love turned to poison, where trust turned into daggers, and every step forward was a trap waiting to be sprung. A war where the battlefield wasn't made of blood and bullets, but of lies, whispers, and carefully timed moves. And in this war, only one of us could win. Imagine this for a second. What would you do if the person who knew every detail about you, every flaw, every secret, suddenly turned against you? If they used your dreams as bait, your fears as ammunition, and your love as a shield to hide their real motives, would you survive? Could you? That was the position I found myself in. A game of chess where my queen had turned into my enemy. And every move I made seemed to play into her hands. But I wasn't about to let her write the ending to my story, because the thing about storms is they don't last forever. And when they pass, they often reveal the strength of what was built to withstand them. She thought she could drown me in lies, bury me in manipulation, and silence me with fear. But she underestimated something far more dangerous than her revenge. My determination to fight back. So, listen closely. This is not a story for the faint of heart. This is the kind of story that will make you question trust, loyalty, and the very meaning of love. It's a tale of secrets uncovered, strategies revealed, and payback delivered in a way no one saw coming. And I promise you this, the ending will leave you speechless. Because the sweetest revenge isn't loud, it isn't violent. It's silent. It's precise. And it strikes at the exact moment your enemy thinks they've already won. Now, before we dive in, if you love stories where betrayal meets justice, where the villains don't just get caught but get exposed, then hit that subscribe button and join us here at Payback Stories. Because trust me, the twists and turns in this one are just the beginning. I met Sarah in college. She wasn't just another face in the crowd, she had that spark. You know, the kind of person who doesn't even have to try, yet every room tilts toward them. That was her. She was smart, ambitious, sharp with her words, but also charming enough to make you forget when she cut too close. And me? I was the guy who fell hard and fast. We weren't just classmates, we became inseparable. Study sessions turned into late-night coffee runs, and coffee runs turned into whispered promises about a future we thought was unstoppable. By the time we graduated, there wasn't a doubt in my mind. Sarah was my forever. We married young. Everyone said we were rushing it, but we didn't care. We had that fire, that rush of love that made us believe the rules didn't apply to us. And for a while, it felt like we were right. We built a life together brick by brick. First a small apartment, then a house. Careers started to take shape. Vacations, anniversaries, inside jokes that only made sense to us. To outsiders, we were couple goals. Friends looked at us with envy. People said if I could just have what you two have. And I believed it too. I thought we had cracked the code. Love, laughter, stability, it all looked solid from the outside. But here's the truth, nobody tells you. Cracks don't show themselves overnight. They creep in, quiet and subtle. Until one day the foundation you thought was indestructible feels like sand slipping through your hands. It started small. I worked long hours, chasing success in a world where everyone was racing to get ahead. I told myself it was for us, for the future we dreamed of, the security, the life we both said we wanted. She told me she supported me, and maybe at first she did. But her eyes? They told a different story. I'd come home late, and the warmth in her voice wasn't there anymore. Instead, there were little comments. Harmless at first. You're always working. Do you even notice me anymore? The kind of things you brush off after a long day. But those little comments grew sharper. Support turned into resentment. And resentment turned into distance. We started living in the same house but on different islands. The dinners grew quieter. The laughter faded. And somewhere along the way, I felt her slipping. I kept telling myself, it's just stress, we'll get through it. But deep down, I think I knew something bigger was happening. And then, one night I saw it. It was late and she thought I was asleep. But something pulled me awake. I don't know if it was instinct or just the silence in the room, but I turned my head and there she was on her phone. Her face lit by the screen, her fingers moving fast. And this little smile tugging at her lips. Not the smile she gave me anymore. I waited until she fell asleep. Then I checked. And what I found? It broke me in ways I can't even describe. Messages, dozens of them. Long conversations, late-night flirting, promises that weren't meant for me. And not with just one man. With 2.2 men, my world shattered in seconds. My chest tightened, my throat closed, and my mind screamed 1,000 questions all at once. Who were they? How long had this been going on? Was everything a lie? But when I confronted her, I didn't get the reaction I expected. I thought she would break down, cry, apologize, try to explain. Instead, she looked at me, calm and collected. She didn't even flinch. And then, she smiled, a cold, sharp smile that sent a chill down my spine. And in that moment, I understood something terrifying. This wasn't just cheating. This wasn't some accident of passion or mistake in a weak moment. No, this was deliberate, calculated. It was a plan. But what kind of plan? What was she aiming for? Was it about the thrill? About power? About control? I didn't know it then, but that smile would haunt me. Because it wasn't just the smile of someone who had been caught. It was the smile of someone who had already thought 10 steps ahead. Someone who wasn't scared of being exposed, because exposure was part of the design. And me? I was standing there, blindsided, with no idea that the battle for my life, my future, my very identity, had just begun. The divorce papers came faster than I could breathe. One day, I was still processing the betrayal, the late-night messages, that haunting smile on her face. And the next, I was staring at a stack of legal documents that felt more like a death sentence than paperwork. But here's the twist. She wasn't after freedom. No, Sarah wasn't interested in walking away clean. She was after everything. The house we bought together, the one I had poured sweat and endless hours into making a home. The business we built side by side, something I thought represented our shared dreams. The savings account we had promised would one day fund our children's future. Even custody of our dog. Max, the one companion I had left who still greeted me with unconditional love. She didn't want separation. She wanted destruction. Every lawyer I spoke to said the same thing. They'd flip through the papers, shake their heads and say, "She's coming for blood." This isn't negotiation. This is war. And I couldn't believe it. I kept asking myself, why? If she wanted to leave, fine. If she found happiness somewhere else, painful as it was, I could have survived it. But this was scorched earth. This was a mission to strip me of everything I'd ever worked for, so I tried reasoning with her. I reached out, called her, even asked to meet face to face. I reminded her of the years we shared, of the nights we spent dreaming about the future, of the vows we had made when we were young and foolish enough to believe in forever. Her reply? Cold as ice, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "You should have paid more attention. Now, I'm collecting what's mine." That one sentence still echoes in my head. It wasn't just her words, it was the way she said it. Calm, detached, like she had already decided the outcome and was simply watching me struggle for her amusement. And then, the isolation began. Friends I thought were mine, people I had known for years, suddenly started drifting away. Some stopped returning my calls. Others looked at me differently, their eyes filled with suspicion instead of trust. And then I found out why. Stories were being twisted. lies planted like seeds. She told people I was neglectful, controlling, selfish. She painted herself as the victim, the poor wife abandoned by a husband consumed with his own ambition to care. And the worst part? People believed her. It was as if she had written a script and I was trapped in her play. Every rumor, every accusation, every tear she shed in public, it was all part of a carefully crafted performance. And I was cast as the villain in a story I didn't write. The walls were closing in. My reputation was under attack. Clients started to pull away from me at work, whispering about things they had heard. My career, the thing I had built tirelessly for over a decade, was slipping out of my hands. My sanity was hanging by a thread. I barely slept. Nights were spent staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every detail, wondering how I hadn't seen this side of her before. Days were spent trying to put out fires, explaining, defending, denying lies that seemed to spread faster than I could catch them. And the cruelest twist? She was winning. Everywhere I turned, she was a step ahead. Every accusation she made lined up with just enough half-truths to make me look guilty. Every time I tried to defend myself, I sounded desperate. I was drowning, and she was the one holding me under. You know what it feels like when your entire life is slipping away and you can't find solid ground? That was me, standing in the ruins of a marriage, watching my reputation collapse, wondering if maybe she had already destroyed me and I just hadn't realized it yet. Because here's the brutal truth. When someone knows every weakness you have, every fear, every insecurity, they don't need to invent weapons. They already have them. And Sarah. She wielded mine like a master. So here's the question I kept asking myself. How do you fight back when the enemy knows every weakness you have? I didn't know it then, but that single question would become the key to everything that came next. Then came the real betrayal, the one that turned my sorrow into a slow, burning anger. It didn't arrive as a single thunderclap. It arrived in a dozen small cuttings, a whisper at a party, an avoided handshake. A client who had other priorities. But the worst of it came when her whispers found a stage in the courtroom. She accused me of things I never did. Words that felt like stones thrown at a window until the whole thing. Shattered, controlling, manipulative, emotionally abusive. The phrases were precise, practiced, and suited to wound. People heard them and nodded as if they had witnessed every private moment themselves. They didn't ask for proof. They didn't want to know the whole truth. They wanted a story. And she gave them one rumor spread like wildfire. With every retelling, the embers grew hotter. Colleagues who once respected me started to keep their distance. Friends who had been in our home for birthdays and barbecues now crossed the street to avoid me. Clients canceled meetings with a polite excuse and a hurried smile. In an instant, the world we had built together began to tilt. And I found myself watching it fall, plank by plank. I remember the first time I heard someone say the words out loud right in front of me. We were at a networking event, my event hand. A woman I'd collaborated with for years sidled up to me, eyes flicking to the crowd as if checking for eavesdroppers. She leaned in and said almost shyly, I heard. Well, I hope you're okay. The way she said it made me feel like a stranger to my own life. It was a sting I didn't expect. That moment burned in me more than any confrontation in the courtroom ever could. And there, under the bright, unforgiving lights of the legal room, she looked at me like a victor. Her posture was immaculate. Her voice steady. Her tears, calculated or real, I couldn't tell, fell at the right dramatic moments. The judge listened. The jury listened. And I realized something chilling. She wasn't merely trying to end us. She wanted to erase me. She wanted the world to forget who I was, to reinterpret my past, to steal my future in plain sight. Everything I had worked for, my reputation, my business, friendships, savings, was on the chopping block. She knew where to strike. She knew which stories would stick and which wounds would bleed longest. She had studied me. She had cataloged my missteps and turned them into weapons. It was not revenge born out of emotion alone. It was strategy. And she executed it ruthlessly. There was a perverse artistry to her cruelty. She targeted the parts of me that could be taken. The trust of my colleagues, the loyalty of my clients, the sympathy of neutral friends. She made sure the lies had texture, just enough truth intertwined to make them believable. If she could convince people that I was the problem in our marriage, then she could justify taking everything that had value. And she did. Sitting in that courtroom watching her performance, something inside me changed. The numbness that had followed the discovery of her messages hardened into clarity. Anger settled into a frame I could use. It wasn't the explosive anger you see in movies, the yelling, the smashed things. It was colder and more focused. It was a recognition that passive denial would never bring me back what I had lost. That night, I came home to an empty house that was still full of echoes, our last dinner plates in the sink, her scarf on the banister, the photograph of us on a mantle that suddenly felt like a relic from another life. I sat in the living room in the dark, and the silence pressed against my ears. It was in that silence that the choice crystallized. I wouldn't just defend myself. I wouldn't just say that's not true and hope the truth carried weight. That wouldn't be enough. She had sharpened her sword. I would need armor and a plan. I vowed to fight back, not out of spite only, but for survival. For my children, of legacy, my business, my name, the life that had been methodically dismantled. I needed to reclaim the narrative, piece by piece. How? You might ask? And yes, you're probably asking it right now. Was it legal maneuvers? Patience? A public reveal? All of the above and more? I realized that if I was going to counter her, I needed to be smarter, quieter, and more disciplined than she was. She had used emotion as a weapon. I would use evidence. She had spread rumors. I would build records, but at that moment, the strategy was still a shadow. I only knew what it couldn't be. It couldn't be a mirror of her tactics. I couldn't become ruthless in the same petty ways she had. I didn't want to win by being as cruel. I wanted to expose the truth in a way that was undeniable, in a way that allowed people to see the full picture. That meant documenting, collecting, and preparing. It meant patience. It meant learning how to play a different game. There were nights I imagined confrontation, scenes, dramatic courtroom showdowns, explosive revelations that would make everyone gasp. Those fantasies felt good in the hollow hours, but reality demanded more nuance. She had already set the stage. I had to change the play altogether. I had to find the proof, the witnesses, the paper trail. I had to make her own lies turn back on her. The betrayal had taught me a painful lesson. People are more likely to believe a simple, well-told lie than a complex truth. Lies travel fast because they're easy to digest. The truth, messy and inconvenient, takes time. So I decided I would invest that time. I would gather facts, not friends' opinions. I would assemble proof, not applause. If the battlefield was public opinion, then evidence would be my artillery. As I sat there in the dark house, feeling the cold seep through the windows, the image of her courtroom smile replayed in my head. It should have broken me. Instead, it became a map. She had revealed her methods, her willingness to manipulate and perform. If she could plan a narrative, I could plan a counter-narrative. If she could weaponize secrets, I could expose the mechanics of her scheme. So, I rose from the couch with a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. I would not be erased. I would not let a crafted performance steal everything I had built. I would fight back. But the question and the cliffhanger that carried me into the long nights that followed was this. How do you beat someone who knows every corner of your heart and every weakness of your past? The night I hit rock bottom was the night my mind stopped breaking and started planning. Pain gave way to a strange clarity. Fear sharpened into strategy. If she was going to play dirty, then I had no choice but to play smarter. The first thing I understood was simple and brutal. Information was the only weapon that could cut cleaner than her lies. Not anger. Not public outbursts. Cold, documented truth. I started small, like someone rebuilding from ruins. A cheap notebook, the kind you'd stash in a drawer, became my ledger. I wrote until my hand cramped 8 times. Little inconsistencies I'd ignored. Moments when her story didn't line up with her actions. Then I backed it up with whatever I could pull. Emails, screenshots, call logs. I learned how to turn memory into a map and suspicion into lines that could be traced. Facts, I realized, don't sway with a tearful performance. They stand firm, unromantic, and unforgiving. Still, I knew I couldn't do this alone. There are corners of a life you can't reach by yourself, doors only someone with experience can pry open. So I called someone who could move where I couldn't. A private investigator named Daniel. A man with the kind of resume that makes liars nervous. Former cop, no nonsense, and used to finding things people thought were perfectly hidden. Asking him to dig into Sarah felt like betrayal in itself, but she had already betrayed everything that mattered. Shame turned into resolve. Daniel started bringing files. At first they were small. Timestamps, fragments of transactions, photos that meant little on their own. Then the pattern emerged. It wasn't random. It was method. Sarah hadn't stumbled into affairs. She had orchestrated them. More than that, she'd been siphoning money from accounts we both used, funneling it into one under her name. The amounts were deliberate. The transfers timed to look like routine expenses. The kind of thing any bank would shrug at if not connected the dots. Thousands became tens of thousands. It was merciless and meticulous, and then like a grenade thrown into a quiet room, came the discovery that changed everything. One of the men she'd been with, one of the secret messages that had lulled me to sleep with the glow of a phone's light, was already married. Not just married, but with a family. That the infidelity included another betrayal on such a scale meant this was no longer only about us. She was a willing participant in someone else's destruction. The stakes were suddenly larger than my pride or our ruins. I had leverage, the kind that could unravel carefully woven lies. With every new file Daniel handed over, the plan took shape. This wasn't revenge born from a drunken night or a vengeful text. It was a methodical counterattack built on truth. I organized the evidence the way a lawyer would, chronologically, cleanly, with cross-references and redundancy. If she claimed I was controlling, I had messages where she tracked my schedule and admitted annoyance at my commitments. If she painted me as reckless with money, the bank statements showed the transfers leaving our joint accounts and landing where only she could access them. Every accusation she made had a paper trail leading back to her, but the art of this plan wasn't in piling up documents. It was in the timing. She had always thrived on spectacle, on drama staged at the exact moment it would hurt the most. So I decided to weaponize patience. Let her smile in the courtroom. Let her look victorious in front of mutual friends. Let the whispers find fertile ground. Because there is a particular cruelty in leading someone to believe they have one, then showing them the board and revealing they were playing a game already lost. That realization is its own punishment. Daniel and I became quiet strategists. We mapped out the disclosures like generals drawing troop movements. Evidence had to be introduced in a sequence that would build an unstoppable narrative. Small inconsistencies first, to seed doubt, then financial records to show motive, then the married man and his ties to crush her credibility. Witnesses were contacted discreetly, people who had seen odd behavior, colleagues who had noticed missing invoices, the woman at the bank who recalled a suspicious transfer. Each voice added a thread until the whole fabric of her story threatened to unravel. I learned to be surgical. No melodrama, no public rants. The public loves a spectacle, but the truth cold and detailed kills a lie in a way spectacle never can. My temperament changed. Where I once would have raged, I now collected, cataloged, and cross-checked. Where I once sought validation, I now sought documentation. I let the anger fuel the work, rather than the work fuel the anger. There were nights when patience felt impossible. I wanted to stand up in the middle of a hearing and hurl the file across the table, to shout every infidelity into the open and watch her crumble. Instead, I held my tongue and kept building. Daniel would show up with more leads, and the steady drip of evidence became a rhythm that steadied me more than any sleep could. For every rumor she planted, I found the receipt that disproved it. For every friend she convinced to turn away, I uncovered texts where she coached them on what to say. The more I found, the clearer her strategy became, and the more certain I was that exposing it would not just save me. It would rip the veil off everything she'd constructed. The plan had another layer. I kept to myself because it required patience and a certain cruelty. I let her believe she was winning. She paraded victories, small legal wins, sympathetic messages from acquaintances, fractured business deals I had to salvage. She basked in it, her smile growing lighter. But each victory she celebrated was cataloged and contextualized, save for the day when the sequence would be undeniable. Let her live in the illusion. That illusion would be the knife. As the day for the decisive hearing drew closer, control returned to me in a way I hadn't felt in months. The helplessness that had gripped me after the messages, the bewilderment at the courtroom displays, those things dissolved into preparation. I wasn't seeking petty payback or public humiliation. I wanted justice in the truest sense, restoration of truth, the clearing of my name, the recovery of what was taken. The plan was to reveal every stitch of manipulation with such clarity that there would be no room left for performance. When the moment came, it would be precise. Not theatrical, but devastating in its exactness. The records would speak. Witnesses would corroborate. The married man's involvement would be exposed. The financial trail would be laid bare. Her smile would falter under the weight of proof. Only then would the realization hit her, not with the fireworks she loved, but with the quiet inevitability of someone who finally understands they were outplayed from the start. I had my evidence. I had my leverage. I had the patience to wait for the perfect convergence. All I needed now was the right doorway to walk through. The right moment to drop the file on the table and watch the whole house of cards tremble. The plan was in motion, and for the first time since I discovered the messages, I slept with a steady heart. The storm was coming, but this time, I was the one who would decide where it landed. The courtroom felt like a held breath, the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums until every sound is magnified. People leaned forward without meaning to, as if the room itself wanted to watch what would happen next. I sat there, palms flat against my knees, trying to keep my heartbeat from sounding like a drum. Months of quiet work, of patient collection and careful timing, came down to a handful of minutes. My lawyer stood, dumped, calm as a surgeon, and began to lay it out. It started small, an innocuous statement about routine transfers, the sort of thing that wouldn't raise an eyebrow if you didn't know where to look. Then came the bank records, stacked, annotated, dates traced like a timeline of betrayal. Each line was a tiny accusation. Each transfer a step in the choreography of a plan I had only begun to understand. The documents rustled like dry leaves as they were passed to the clerk, and the room watched. Next were the messages. Screenshots printed on crisp paper that showed late-night liaisons, scheduling notes, and the kind of flirty language that needed no interpretation. There were dates, timestamps, and the odd, careless phrase that betrayed arrogance, someone absolutely certain they would never be caught. Photos followed, vacation snaps cropped to hide faces. The kind of image that looks harmless until you notice the detail that connects it to a lie. The evidence was small things assembled into a devastating mosaic. Then the witnesses. Quiet people who had been there, an assistant who remembered invoices that never made it to accounting. A neighbor who'd seen packages exchanged at odd hours. The bank teller who had raised an eyebrow at repetitive transfers into a single account. Each voice was steady. Each story stitched to the documents until the whole picture lost its blur. Daniel was in the back, expression impassive. The man who had done the digging, now watching the architecture of his work stand on its own. I watched Sarah across the room. At first, she sat with the same composure she'd shown since this began. Hair, perfect. Shoulders squared, the practiced look of someone used to controlling scenes. But as the evidence mounted, color drained from her face. Pale crept up the neck until her cheeks showed only the faintest hint of warmth. Her hands, which had been steady for so long, trembled when she reached to smooth a stray hair. It was a small thing, but in that courtroom silence it was loud. Her entire strategy collapsed in minutes. The script she'd relied on, victim, betrayed woman. The man who'd been too wrapped up in his work to notice fell apart under the weight of documentation. The lies that had been woven with such care were unraveled stitch by stitch. What had been an atmosphere of sympathy shifted, almost imperceptibly, into a slow realization. People who had nodded and whispered supported her earlier. Testimony now watched with a different look, one that asked questions instead of handing over verdicts. Then, in a motion that felt like the ground shifting beneath our feet, the judge did more than dismiss the charges. He leaned forward, eyebrows pulled together, and asked direct questions about the transfers, the timing, the intent. He read aloud lines from statements that contradicted her testimony. He didn't merely poke holes, he exposed seams. The courtroom, which had been arranged as a theater for her performance, suddenly had a new director, and the lights were trained on the fabric of her claims. Within an hour, the tone had changed. The prosecuting attorney who had been prepared for my defense shifted her stance. Questions that had been aimed at me were redirected. Instead of looking to validate a story of mistreatment, the court began to consider whether a narrative of manipulation had been manufactured. Terms like financial fraud, perjury, and manipulation started to appear in hushed conversations among the gallery. It was surreal. Watching the accusations reverse like a camera panning to reveal a different subject. Friends who had once believed her stories sat in the back with their mouths slightly open, as if replaying scenes in their heads and trying to reconcile two versions of a person they thought they knew. Eyes met mine at strange angles, some apologetic, some wary, some simply shocked. Those who had stood by her now shifted, uncomfortable in the clarity of the evidence. People had a hard time unlearning the narrative they'd been told. But evidence has a stubborn quality. It resists emotional appeal when it is precise and well-ordered. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. My revenge wasn't a cry. It was exposure. It was the slow, deliberate unveiling of facts until the only reasonable conclusion was the one I'd been building toward. There was no cinematic revelation of her confessing on the stand with tears and a dramatic collapse. Instead, there was something more devastating. The courtroom's steady, unyielding march toward truth. Each document, each witness, each ledger line turned into a mirror reflecting her construction back at her. She watched as the empire she'd built, composed of half-truths. Performance and carefully placed sympathies crumbled. There was a sound to it. It's not literal, but felt. The hush as people realized their loyalties had been misplaced. A tiny intake of breath when a banker's note contradicted a dramatic claim. And for the first time since this nightmare began, she looked afraid. Not the practiced fear of someone playing to a room, but the real, raw kind that steals color and steadiness and leaves a person exposed. I felt something unusual then. A complex mixture of relief and a hollow I hadn't anticipated. Part of me wanted to stand and shout for the months of humiliation, for the lost clients and the awkward silences from friends. But the moment didn't belong to spectacle. It belonged to justice. Everything I had planned, late nights of cross-checking, quiet phone calls to witnesses, the patient arrangement of details was being vindicated not by drama, but by the blunt force of undeniable truth. When it was over, the judge's gavel didn't thunder like in the movies. It landed with measured authority. The case was not simply dismissed in my favor. The record began to reflect the possibility of consequences for her actions. The language in the judgment shifted, not just restitution but investigations. Questions of intent, hints at legal follow-ups. She was no longer the person who could shape other people's perceptions with a well-timed sob or a performative outcry. Instead, she was the subject of scrutiny. As we walked out of the courthouse, the sunlight felt oddly honest, bright enough to show every detail. People who had avoided me now gave reluctant nods. Others looked away, the way people do when they learn something they can't easily reconcile. I thought about how many nights I had spent in the dark piecing together a life that had been dismantled. And I thought about her, the woman who had turned intimacy into weaponry, who had thought herself untouchable. But the final question that sat heavy on my chest, as we left, was one that the audience watching this would probably ask too. What happens when the villain loses everything? Is the fall the end of the story, or merely the start of another? In that brief moment, watching her shoulders slump under a weight she had engineered for others, I understood that destruction is rarely simple. Winning doesn't erase the scars. Exposure doesn't heal the nights spent rebuilding trust with yourself. Still seeing the truth come to light. Watching what she had so carefully constructed collapse under facts rather than rumor that, in itself, felt like a new kind of survival in the end. The court's ruling landed like the sound of chains snapping open. The gavel came down, and with it, months of lies shattered. The judgment was clear. The house was mine, the savings untouchable, my reputation restored. Everything she had tried to erase was placed back into my hands, not because of anger or pity, but because the truth had proven stronger than her. Performance Sarah walked out of that courtroom with nothing but the weight of her own lies pressing down on her shoulders. No house, no fortune, no carefully crafted mask to hide behind. For so long she had moved like a queen on a chessboard, believing she could corner me at will. But queens can fall, and when they do, they fall hard. The man she thought would stand by her, the one she whispered promises to in the dark, vanished as soon as the storm broke. He went back to his wife, his family, his safer world. To him, Sarah had been a thrill, a dangerous distraction, but when exposure came, he chose his own skin. She was left abandoned by the very man she thought would validate her betrayal, one by one. The doors she had once opened with charm and manipulation began to close. Friends she had convinced with her sob stories drifted away, embarrassed by how icily they had been swayed. The social circles where she once shined no longer had a place for her. The lies had caught up, and without them, she had no foundation left. And me? I rebuilt. Not quickly, Not with fireworks, but slowly, piece by piece. At first it was hard, because survival isn't glamorous. It's quiet mornings where you fight the urge to look back. It's nights where the silence feels like a test. But over time, the cracks started to fill. Work returned. Clients came back. Old friends reached out with cautious apologies. And inside, something steadier began to grow. I realized survival isn't just about fighting back. It's about patience. About knowing when to strike and when to stay silent. About understanding that revenge isn't fire-rich strategy. And the victory doesn't come from shouting. It comes from lasting. The day I stood in front of the mirror and truly looked at myself, I was startled. For months, I had seen a broken man reflected back, tired eyes, defeated posture, shoulders sagging under the weight of betrayal. But that day was different. The man in the mirror stood straighter. His eyes weren't hollow. They carried something near resolve. I didn't just see a survivor. I saw someone who had been through the worst betrayal imaginable and had come out not just standing, but stronger. Someone who had learned that trust is fragile, that love can turn into a weapon, but also that no one can erase you if you refuse to vanish. And yet, as much as I wanted to celebrate that victory, one question lingered like a shadow in the back of my mind. Was it worth it? Was the pain, the sleepless nights, the endless chess game of evidence and strategy worth the final outcome? Maybe the answer doesn't matter. Maybe what matters is this. I lived through it. I faced the storm she tried to bury me under, and I didn't just survive, I rebuilt. And though the scars will never fully fade, they tell a story I'll never forget. Because in the end, betrayal tried to destroy me. But instead, it forged me into someone stronger. Betrayal cuts deeper than most wounds. It changes the way you see the world, the way you trust, the way you measure the people closest to you. It can turn laughter into suspicion, comfort into caution, and love into something you no longer recognize. But here's the truth. Betrayal doesn't have to define you. It doesn't have to be the end of your story. Sarah believed revenge meant destroying meat, taking everything I had, breaking my spirit, leaving me in ruins while she walked away smiling. But she misunderstood what real revenge is. True revenge isn't born from screaming, fists, or chaos. It's not about burning your enemy's world down just to watch the flames. Real revenge is quieter, sharper, and far more devastating. It's about exposing the truth they've tried so hard to hide. It's about outlasting their lies, and most importantly, it's about rising when someone else tries to bury you. If you've ever been betrayed, you know how tempting it is to sink to their level, to lash out, to fight with the same cruelty they used on you. But that's not where the victory lies. You don't win by becoming them. You win by standing taller, by holding your ground when the storm hits. By refusing to be erased, pain can break you. It can hollow you out, make you bitter, leave you stuck in the shadows of what was taken from you. Or it can become something else entirely. Pain can sharpen you. It can make you stronger, wiser, more patient. The choice, as hard as it feels, is always yours. I chose to let the pain forge me. I chose to take what was meant to destroy me and turn it into armor. And in the end, that's what gave me the strength to fight back. Not with anger, but with truth. As for Sarah, her story became her punishment. She built her world on deception, on betrayal, on the belief that lies would carry her farther than loyalty ever could. But lies have a way of unraveling. And when they did, everyone saw who she really was. Her empire wasn't stolen from her, it collapsed because it was never real to begin with. And maybe that's the greatest payback of all. To watch someone who lived for appearances be stripped of every mask. Left to face the world as they truly are. So if you're sitting there, carrying the sting of betrayal in your own life, let this be your reminder. Survival is victory. Truth is the sharpest weapon you'll ever wield. And the person who tried to bury you will never understand the power of watching you rise higher than they ever imagined you could. This was my story. But maybe, in some way, it's yours too. And if this tale shook you, if it made you think of your own scars and how you rose above them, hit subscribe to Payback Stories. Because the next story waiting for you here, it might just be even wilder.